Because you knew that deadly force was unreasonable and unwarranted in those circumstances.
I didn't want to hurt anybody.
You didn't want to hurt anybody.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala. It is time now for today's Talkback segment. Each day we post a question on Court TV's social media pages. We gather your comments and questions and then respond right here on the show. Today we asked you, do you think Kim Potter helped herself while testifying in her own defense? Still with me, civil rights attorney and former criminal defense attorney, DeWitt Lacy. DeWitt, let's get to our first comment. It comes from Lindy Jones. Lindy says she can't even say his name. Guilty is coming out of her pores. You know, you mentioned that earlier, and I thought it was strange, and I couldn't make out if you think that she was advised not to say his name or she just couldn't say his name.
I think that's absolutely a tactic. I would imagine that they had advised her to kind of maybe disempower the mentioning of his name, but I think it made her seem impersonal, right? She wasn't a real person, and obviously to this person it seemed the same way.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a tactic, I'm not sure I agree with it. All right, next comment comes from Ariana Rivera. Ariana thought the opposite of our last viewer. She says, she's so traumatized, it's possible she's suffering from PTSD. Every time she has to relive that day, she crumbles. How awful. Hope she gets a lot of therapy. And, you know, I'll tell you what, I have to agree with Ariana. That's how it came across to me. It seemed like she was trying her best. I think part of when I said earlier that she seemed to be testifying in a rote manner, I think that was her attempt to keep it all under control. But every time she got to the point where she was talking about what actually happened, she just couldn't keep it together.
Yeah, and that, you know, it's hard to say how that's sitting with some jurors, but I tell you, regardless of how stone-faced people may be, you know, when somebody's crying and hurting like that publicly, you tend to take a little sympathy for them.
You know, they didn't bring a lot of that out on direct, DeWitt. Would you have done more with the idea? They did mention that she was in therapy because of this, but that was really it. Would you have gone deeper into whether she was depressed or some of the things that she was dealing with mentally?
I don't know, and we don't know if there were any motions eliminated to exclude that type of testimony, right? Because I don't know that that's necessarily relevant. Maybe, I guess, just sentencing, maybe, but certainly not during the culpability phase.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, yeah.
All right, let's go to our next comment. It's from Angela Schlani. Angela says, really struggling with this case. I believe it was an accident, but she took the life of a young man. Morally, I feel like she should have some consequences for taking that life. And, you know, tell you what, a lot of people fall right there in that area right there. It feels like there needs to be something, some culpability here. Just not sure if it's criminal.
Yeah, and I could see that, you know, playing to a lot of people that way. Now, look, there's some folks who might think this is all a kind of her putting on a show. But I think it'll be hard for everybody on the jury to have those feelings. You know, her being on the stand today certainly could affect in a positive way for her defense.
Yeah, speaking of putting on a show, ultimately, DeWitt, the majority of people on Facebook seem to think the tears were faked, interesting enough. Our next comment is from Valerie Wilson. Valerie says, I think her breakdown didn't work for her so terribly, faked it last like 2 seconds. And Susie Martin says she's not a likable witness. Not sure why, but she doesn't come across as genuine. I don't think she should have testified. Interesting. Do you think she should have testified?
You know, with all the other testimony that was going in there, I mean, look, you hear that testimony of that mother and the father. Oh, my gosh, they are hurting and in such pain. His girlfriend, there's a lot of emotion and empathy on the other side. I think they had to do something to try and push the needle back the other way in order to gain some type of empathy for the defendant.
But interestingly, DeWitt, do you think, even if she wasn't likable, even, you know, this wasn't one of those cases where we had to believe what she said. We saw what happened. She was telling us what she was thinking. It kind of jibes with some of the facts of the case. Does it really matter whether she was likable? In some cases, we can clearly say, not a likable defendant, might hurt them. Is it going to hurt her in this case?
I think here that matters, right? Because you see the needle is kind of wavering one way or the other, whether or not people think that you have to dole out some consequence criminally or otherwise. And, you know, whether or not that may hinge on whether or not they believe she's likable and deserve it of some type of second chance without criminal consequence.
All right. So how do you think this one's going to turn out, DeWitt?
I tell you, I think she goes down on 2. I think she goes down on 2. I don't think she goes down on 1. I think there's a compromise verdict, and she gets second degree.
Wow. Okay. So we'll see. Again, closing arguments will begin on Monday. There'll be a charge to the jury, and then they will begin deliberating. And we'll be here for it all. So make sure your channels and your TVs are tuned right here to Court TV. All right, DeWitt Lacy, thank you so much for joining me this evening. If I don't see you again or speak to you, you have a fantastic holiday, you and your family. Thanks again for being on the show. I'm Michael Ayala. It's been a pleasure being with all of you as well. Coming up next in closing arguments, the biggest moments from Kim Potter's testimony today on the stand. So keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.